Welcome back. We are diving deep into really a fascinating set of source materials
Yeah.
today. We're pulling back the curtain on the rapid, sometimes kind of messy development of early German art. We're looking at a collection of 15th century German graphic arts, some rare engravings paired with even rarer drawings from a really foundational collection. And our mission here is to shine a light on the drawing during this period, not as, a finished piece for display, but as this sort of ephemeral working tool, a blueprint maybe, and honestly, the most fragile link we have left to the great master workshops operating just before Dürer's time.
Yeah, and to really get why these few drawings are so precious, you have to understand the massive shift happening in the 15th century. It was just an explosive time for graphic arts, and fundamentally it was driven by, well, material innovation. Think about this. The first paper mill in Nuremberg, which would become Dürer's hometown, it started up around 1390. Suddenly, paper became, relatively speaking, cheap and widely available.
Right, so accessible material?
Exactly. And that immediately spurred growth in two main directions. You had finished prints made specifically for sale, commercial products, and then you had all the auxiliary materials, which basically means the drawings. But here's the challenge, the real kicker. These drawings were seen purely as working material. They got used up, they got dirty, they were often just, well, thrown away. Systematic collecting of drawings. That didn't really even start until the 17th century.
So late.
Yeah, which means the small collection that actually survives today, it represents just crumbs, really, of what must have existed.
Crumbs. Okay, let's start with one of those crumbs then.
Yeah.
The absolute oldest piece in this collection we're looking at, the anonymous Three Magi.
Yeah.
It's attributed to the Austrian school, dating way back to the 1430s.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it, it's not just a quick sketch. It's actually quite finished, a polished composition, heavy shadows, strong sense of volume. But wait, why polish a working tool so intensely? Doesn't that kind of contradict the whole idea of it being disposable?
That's a really sharp question. And the polish, that actually reveals its function. See, the key detail is that very clear frame drawn in pen right around the composition.
Ah, okay, I see that.
That tells us it wasn't like a preparatory sketch for a painting. No, this was almost certainly the final approved design for a three-dimensional monument, most likely a sculptural relief or maybe the wing of a small wooden altar.
Right.
And the fact that it shows almost no corrections, no searching lines.
It's very clean.
Exactly. It tells us the artist had already done the messy work, the drafting, beforehand. This was the clean, final version, probably intended for the sculptor's workshop to actually execute from. Sadly, the companion drawing, Mary and Joseph, presumably, and the final altar itself, they're lost. But it proves how essential the drawing was for that kind of cross-media collaboration.
Okay, so the drawing is a final blueprint for another medium.
Yeah.
We see that idea again, right, with the Madonna and Child on a pedestal piece,
Yeah.
where the artist is maybe designing a statue or perhaps sketching from an existing statue to build up the workshop's visual library.
Precisely, yes. And that Madonna drawing, it also shows something else important, a bit of early material problem solving. You notice the paper is grounded.
You mean colored or primed before drawing?
Yeah, exactly. Later on, in other centuries, that was often decorative, for effect. But here, this early in the 15th century, the grounding was likely applied to, well, compensate for the pretty poor quality and often unpleasant sort of grayish color of the cheap paper itself.
Ah, so it made a better surface to work on.
Right, a better surface for that really meticulous pen work. So necessity was driving that early technical innovation.
Okay, so we've got cheap paper enabling these detailed internal blueprints for things like sculpture. If paper was suddenly so available, what other kinds of commissions did this open up?
Well, it really opened the door wide for applied arts, especially projects that needed, clarity and could be produced relatively quickly, like stained glass. A really significant chunk of surviving 15th century drawings are actually plans for windows.
Stained glass, okay.
So if we look at this drawing of the two standing saints, that St. John the Baptist and St. Lawrence, you can tell him by his attribute, the gridiron.
Right. The instrument of his martyrdom.
Exactly. The function here is pretty clear. Look how simple the background is, almost neutral, and it's framed by that decorative arch. That kind of simplicity is almost a fingerprint for a stained glass project.
Yeah.
You need that clarity, strong figures without loads of complex background detail that would just be impossible to render effectively in leaded glass.
In this particular drawing, it gives us a peek into the working life of a real giant, Michael Wohlgemuth.
Absolutely it does. There's an old inscription that ties this drawing directly to the workshop of Michael Wolfmuth. He was arguably the most important master working in Nuremberg in the second half of the 15th century. His workshop was a real powerhouse. They were handling huge altarpieces, major book illustrations, and significantly large stained glass commissions.
And this is huge because this is the very master Albrecht Dürer's father chose, right, to apprentice young Dürer to for 3 years. So this drawing is like a snapshot of the actual environment that shaped, well, arguably the greatest German artist ever.
Exactly. You're looking right into Dürer's training ground. And the fact that it depicts St. Lawrence, it even suggests the project might have been destined for the Church of St. Lawrence. Right there in Nuremberg, we know Wohlgemuth's shop did a lot of work there in the 1470s. So this isn't just a drawing. It's potentially a document tied directly to Dürer's earliest education.
Okay, moving from the, let's say, practical side of stained glass design to the pure expressive power of the line itself. We see drawings like the Flagellation of Christ. It's a thin pen drawing, but it uses this really intense hatching, clearly thinking ahead to the copper plate for engraving. And the figures, they have that raw, emotional, almost tortured quality that really became a hallmark of German art, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And that whole aesthetic, particularly in engraving, it's dominated by the influence of one man, Martin Schongauer. He wasn't just, a great artist. He was the 15th century master who basically invented personal branding in the art world.
Personal branding. How so?
Well, Schongauer was a superstar across Europe. I mean, in Italy, they apparently called him Bella Martina, beautiful Martin. But his real innovation was this. He was the first master we know of who consistently put his distinct monogram M+S directly onto his engravings.
Oh, the M+S mark.
Yes. Why? Well, to guarantee their authenticity, obviously, but also to establish a certain quality standard and, crucially, to raise their commercial value. It was, frankly, a brilliant, very early marketing move that helped his prints circulate absolutely everywhere.
And of course, there's that famous story about Dürer's youthful ambition, right? Traveling all the way to Colmar, specifically hoping to study under Schongauer.
Only to arrive in 1492 and find out the great master had died of the plague just the year before.
Such a disappointment for him. But it just shows the immense pull Schongauer had on that next generation.
Exactly. And his influence wasn't just through the finished prints people bought, it was also through his working method. We can see this in drawings like The Head of a Bearded Man. Schongauer apparently created dozens and dozens of these preparatory studiums, that's the German term, basically studies of individual figures, heads, bits of draped clothing, things like that.
Okay, like a library of parts.
Pretty much, yeah, like building blocks. He would then assemble these studiums into his incredibly complex, often very crowded final compositions, like his famous large bearing of the cross engraving.
Right, that one's packed with figures.
It is, and these preparatory heads, these studies, they circulated widely even after he died. Now, the Hermitage copy of this bearded man study, just like the original, which is now in Copenhagen, has been physically trimmed along the contour of the head and then mounted onto a completely separate sheet of paper.
That's unusual.
Very unusual. And this shared history, this identical treatment, it strongly suggests they were probably acquired together, maybe straight out of the Schongauer workshop materials after his death, which just underscores their original function as, disposable reference studiums, not finished art pieces.
So Dürer missed Martin Schongauer, the star. But he didn't leave Colmar empty-handed, did he? The sources say he was, well, warmly received by Martin's family and mentored by the other artist in the family, Ludwig.
That's right. It's almost certain that Dürer got his actual hands-on training in copper engraving from Ludwig Schongauer, Martin's brother. Ludwig is a much rarer master, though. We only have, I think, 4 unique signed engravings known by him, bearing the monogram L+S, so his work is often a bit harder to pin down definitively.
And the drawing attributed to Ludwig in this collection, The Wild Men Riding, is one of those fantastic pieces that just tells you so much about the era. These wild men, they were figures from mythology, right?
Yeah.
Symbolizing untamed nature, savage power, often used on coats of arms as shield supporters.
Exactly. Ancient epic figures representing that raw, untamed side of things.
But then you look closely at the drawing, and you've got these hairy, completely naked, savage-looking figures. But they're riding on horses that are fully kitted out with bridles and horseshoes.
Yes.
It's this wonderful contradiction, isn't it? Untamed nature being transported by, well, domesticated technology. What's that telling us?
Well, it's telling us that even the most famous masters, or perhaps especially their less famous siblings, were great recyclers. Ludwig may be struggling a bit to make his own compositional mark under the shadow of his incredibly famous brother Martin. He borrowed. He directly copied the pose of the horse and really the overall composition from one of Martin's much earlier engravings, the peasant family traveling to market.
No way, really?
Yes. The wild men simply replaced the peasants, but the posture of the horse, the general layout, it's basically the same. It just shows how artistic ideas, especially successful compositional templates, were circulated, copied, and kind of reinterpreted within the family circle and the wider workshop network. It's an efficient system of education and production, even if it leads to some slightly odd juxtapositions like wild men on well-shod horses.
Efficiency over originality sometimes, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot to another giant, Hans Holbein the Elder. Now, Holbein is interesting because he's kind of unique among the major German masters of the time in that he almost entirely avoided engraving, didn't he? He focused almost exclusively on painting, altars, and portraits, running a massive workshop down in Augsburg.
That's right. Very unusual for that period. And we can actually see his process for landing those big, lucrative painting contracts in his beautiful Dormition of the Virgin drawing. It's done in very delicate pen and watercolor. It was clearly a design, a project for an altar wing. And we know the finished altarpiece it was for Kaisheim, just outside Augsburg. It still exists today. So that confirms Holbein definitely secured the major commission.
Okay, so the pitch worked.
The pitch worked. And by comparing this drawing to the finished painting, which, interestingly, also seems to follow a composition by Schongauer, showing his pervasive influence, we can analyze the drawing's specific function. There are some crucial differences, actually, in the composition, the surrounding figures.
So it wasn't the final exact blueprint?
Probably not. It leads us to believe this wasn't the final workshop drawing, the one they'd scale up directly. Instead, it was likely a demonstration drawing. A highly polished, attractive sample shown to the patron. It was essentially the sales pitch, the proof of concept, designed really just to gain approval and secure that lucrative contract before they embarked on the long, expensive work of the final painting itself.
Wow. The drawing as a piece of artistic salesmanship, that's a really important idea. Okay, and the second Holbein drawing in the collection is completely different. It speaks much more to his private, internal working process. It's a silver point sketch sheet. And it looks almost like a random collection of ideas jotted down. There are two young men believed to be his sons, actually, including the future Hans Holbein the Younger.
That's right.
Then there's a quick topographical sketch of Augsburg and a figure caught in motion, all sort of jumbled together on one small sheet.
And the technique itself is incredibly demanding. Silver point, well, it's totally unforgiving. You cannot erase the line once it's made.
No going back.
No going back. It requires specially prepared paper, too, usually grounded with bone dust or something similar. The artist had to be supremely confident in their hand-eye coordination, and the fact that he fills this small sheet with completely disparate elements, intimate portraits next to a city view, next to quick movement studies, that confirms its nature as a private working album sheet, just capturing momentary ideas as they occurred. And the sheer lack of correction, even with this incredibly unforgiving medium, it just highlights Holbein's unbelievable precision and confidence. If you look closely, the way things are arranged suggests he might have started with the cityscape, perhaps, and then, seeing empty space, quickly added the sketches of his sons when they were nearby, available, turning the page into this sort of spontaneous visual diary.
That's a perfect way to put it, a visual diary. So we've really covered some ground here. We've moved from the drawing as maybe the oldest surviving work we have from a workshop to the blueprint for sculpture, then the essential teaching and working tool for Dürer's own teachers, the core reference material behind Schongauer's brand building, and finally, even the sales pitch for Holbein's major commissions.
It really shows that in the 15th century, the drawing was the absolute unsung hero. It was the ephemeral, disposable tool that actually made all those finished masterpieces possible. And looking at them gives us this incredibly rare glimpse into the messy, immediate thought process of these great masters, the quick notes, the rough drafts, the calculations, the sales pitches, all the stuff the public was absolutely never meant to see.
Right, the behind-the-scenes material.
Yeah. Exactly. And it leads to a fascinating thought, doesn't it? If these few surviving drawings, literally the scraps and preparatory notes that were often just meant to be thrown away, if they hold such immense value and insight for us today into the minds of masters like Wolkmuth, Holbein, Schongauer, Just imagine the treasure trove of knowledge that's been lost forever, simply because the artists themselves saw them purely as work, not as art.
Yeah.
So maybe consider the modern equivalent. What about the digital drafts you delete? The early concept art files stored on an old hard drive? The planning memos, the emails? What contemporary working materials are we all treating as ephemeral right now that future historians might desperately crave just to understand our own creative processes?